I'm just amazed. You're the smartest tennis ball I've ever met.
Oh, thank you. All right, let's just go right into it. Ballers, we have a really special guest tonight. Legend of the five-string banjo, founding member of the legendary Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. And this past summer, John McEuen, you marked the 50th anniversary of the extremely important album, a 3 LP magnum opus, which many consider to be the first Americana album, in fact. Will the Circle Be Unbroken? You wrote a book about recording it. There it is.
It's called Will the Circle Be Unbroken, strangely enough. And it's the 50th year of this album. 50 years. It's like the dark side of the banjo, dark side of the moon, bluegrass.
Did you think when you were making the record that it was going to have the impact that it had? Did you realize something big was happening?
I knew I was playing with Earl Scruggs and Doc Watson, who I asked if they wanted to play. I asked Earl first week of June when he was in Colorado, and he said I'd be proud to. And a week later, Doc Watson was playing the same club. His son, Merle, said, well, this will be a good thing for Daddy. The folk music thing's dying out. There was about 120 people in the audience of a 250-seat club. And Doc said yes. And 8 weeks later, we started recording the album that became, it's in the Grammy Hall of Fame and the Library of Congress.
It transcends being just like the album of a band. It's a document of American music in a sense.
You know, I'm really glad to see what happened to the green ball because it started his career as the ball that hangs down in the garage to show your mom how far to drive into. The next job was bumpers on the walkers. You know, a guy walking a walker and you're down there on the feet.
Being on the bottom of a cane is a tough gig for a tennis ball.
Yeah, then somebody picked one up and hit it with a stick, and it bounced, and they went, hey, we could do something with that.
Right. Back to the interview. So you collaborated with the Old Guard on the record, man, and you guys had just released Uncle Charlie and His Dog. That record sort of bridged generations a little bit.
There were a couple of bluegrass songs on Uncle Charlie that I put on there. One was Clinch Mountain Backstep. And I didn't know at the time that Doc Watson was from Clinch Mountain area in North Carolina, Virginia. Another one was Randy Lynn Rag, a song written by Earl Scruggs, a really fast banjo tune. It was probably the best playing I had done that year. And another song on the Uncle Charlie album was a country rock type of thing called Some of Shelley's Blues. And that started with a banjo frailing. And that's kind of what they heard. Oh, and Mr. Bojangles, with the only electric instrument on Mr. Bojangles was a bass.
The bass guitar. And that was unusual at the time. I mean, it sort of was groundbreaking.
It was like dirt clod breaking.
You know, you were interviewed by Ken Burns for his documentary series Country Music, and I think it was like episode 6 or something where they talked about Will the Circle Be Unbroken.
Yeah, it was really quite an honor.
And you said something about Earl Scruggs playing. You know, you said something about he plays banjo differently than anyone else does.
You've done a lot of studying, apparently. Earl Scruggs is like Elvis. You know, there's a lot of Elvis impersonators out there. None of them sound like Elvis, but they kind of look like them, kind of act like him, you can tell they're trying to sound like, well, there's a lot of banjo players out there that try to sound like Earl. And I only know one that does it, a guy named Charlie Cushman. He's great, but nobody sounds like Earl.
He has his own specific. He's not playing the chords. He's sort of playing around them or something. You said.
Well, yeah, because he has a way of syncopating his notes and hitting the strings. Anyway, he's a magic player. People in that form of music and from that era, they know that and they respect that.
So when you first met Earl Scruggs, you kind of embarrassed yourself, right? Like he came up to it, you were like screwing around or something.
Well,
playing badly.
You must have read my book.
I read a pretty good portion of it.
The first book that I put out a few years ago is called The Life I've Picked, and it's about this life I've picked. I was trying to find a title for the book.
That's a great title.
I told my wife, I'll be back out of the studio, my little studio room, when I figure out a title for this book about the life I've picked. And I went downstairs.
You were like, I just said it.
I looked at the other 3 pages of titles I had, and they all sucked. So
It's a great title. In fact, everybody who interviews you comments on what a great title it is.
I said this to Steve Martin. What do you think of this title? He goes, perfect. And he's always been good with titles. He was nice to give me some ideas on editing. He read my manuscript. And, you know, when I read the final manuscript before it went to print, I couldn't put it down.
Well, that's a sign of a good book.
I was waiting for that laugh.
I want to talk about Steve Martin with you, but before we go there, to keep talking about Circle for a second, you guys recorded that with 2 mics, right? Like just like old school, like
on 2 tracks. It wasn't 2 mics.
Okay.
Everybody had a microphone to work with in front of them, and if it was their solo, they'd move in. That everybody was in front of their own mic, and when it was their chance to take a solo,
here I have this picture.
Man, you're good. That's right.
Yeah, sorry, Maybelle Carter. That blows my mind. She's a legend of music, of American music.
She didn't think of herself as that. When I gave her her first gold album, a couple years after this record was out, she said, well, I didn't think that many people even heard these old songs of mine. And
oh my gosh.
Maybelle, they have. Everybody plays Wildwood Flower. Every guitar player.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was just like the lady next door that happened to write music and play the guitar.
Were you like in awe of her when you were hanging out with Mother Maybelle Carter?
I was, yeah. I had spent a good 3 years listening to an album, Flatt and Scruggs do songs of the famous Carter family. It was an album that Louise Scruggs suggested they do because she managed that group, and she thought it would be a good idea to do a concept album about Flatt and Scruggs. It was all Carter family songs, and it was an album I fell in love with the Carter family music. I didn't know then that she'd recorded her first record in 1927, acoustically, not electric. In other words, she was sitting in front of a big megaphone, playing the guitar and singing with A.P. Carter and Sarah Carter on each side. That was one track, mono.
Is that a wax cylinder recording you're describing?
Well, it was a disc. They made, I think it was 15 songs for Ralph Peer. That created country music right there in Bristol, Tennessee.
Wow.
In the library where they were recording. Hey, Maybelle, A.P. Carter said. It says here in the paper a man's in town in Bristol recording songs, and he'll pay $50 a song. Let's go give him some of our songs. And they did.
Yep.
They changed the history of music.
And I think Jack White released some of those recently on his Third Man Records.
Well, Jack White was smart enough and nice enough to come and produce a Loretta Lynn album. He is a good guy. He brought a lot of people to the attention of the public, and that had been on the verge of being forgotten, which is what we were trying to do with the Circle album. Because, well, the Dirt Band, we were out playing colleges and all over in the late 60s, early 70s, and people were asking, where do you learn to play the banjo like that? And where'd that fiddle playing come from? And just how about that flat picking guitar? And ever heard of Doc Watson? No, who's that? Ever heard of Earl Scruggs? No, who's that? Well, it seemed to me there was a real good market for letting people know about those icons. And their music is real, and it's real to this day, and it's still fresh in a strange way, because this record It brings people into it. My brother, who shot all the photographs that this book likes to talk about, that I talk about each photograph
Uh,
and story.
the
And
legendary William McEuen,
yeah,
who he was sort of a ringleader in a sense of this project, right?
he was our George Martin, yes. And
Good
he
analogy.
produced the records, he shot photographs, and he created the album covers for several records in the 70s. Yeah, Bill was quite instrumental. In fact, he played guitar on one song because Jeff Hanna couldn't get the rhythm right. Couldn't. No, you got to play it like this. And he went out in the studio and played the guitar, and that was really cool. And he shot all the photographs except for a couple that I took a picture of him with Maybelle Carter and Doc and in the control room, and that was really special
Wow.
to both of us.
I mean, he turned you on to the blues and to roots music initially, didn't he? And it was kind of a thing you guys shared together.
I'm just amazed. You're the smartest tennis ball I've ever met.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I appreciate it. He did, right? You guys really it was sort of like, you know, that's pretty awesome.
You don't roll around and just do nothing. You just
No, I pay attention. I do research.
My brother was teaching me how to play the guitar.
Yeah.
I was 17. I got a guitar, and for 6 months, I was his student, and I couldn't play anything my teacher couldn't play, and so I couldn't impress him very well. And then I heard a group called the Dillards, and Rodney and Doug Dillard and Mitch and Dean. I didn't know what a Dillard was. I didn't know what a club was. Hey, John, you want to go to we're going to a club later on tonight. You want to go? We're going to see the Dillards. What's a Dillard? I didn't know they were on the Andy Griffith Show as the Darlin Family.
Oh.
I didn't know they had an album that had just come out. After I saw them, I did because I was watching them and I just was taken away. They were like a combination of the Smothers Brothers and Flatt and Scruggs and Don Reno, Red Smiley. They were really perfect.
When you were talking about like banjos, your first banjo you kind of made because when you met the Dillards, didn't they tell you take off one of the strings, do this, take off a string, switch this string with that string? And then you went home and did it and came back with the banjo and said, now what? Right?
Well, it was that after I saw him, I went back to see him again the next night and said, Rodney, I don't have a banjo, but I got to play one. Do you have a guitar? And he goes, yeah, take off the fifth string and put a first string on the fifth string area and put a little nail under the fifth fret, little HO railroad spike.
Oh, yeah.
And so you can make it like the fifth string on the banjo. I went, okay, I'll do that. I went home and did it, and I didn't know how to tune it. So, I used to.
Did you have a moment of hesitation before you drove a nail into the neck of your guitar? Or were you just like, man, I'm doing it, and you just were like, the Dillard said it's cool, I'm just gonna do it?
No, I didn't hesitate at all. I knew it was a piece of wood.
Yeah, no big deal.
No, I know. I used to play a fish, but I couldn't tune a fish, and I couldn't.
You did play with fish too.
Well, I played with fish a few times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm on the group Fish DVD from Las Vegas. But I went back the next night to figure out with Rodney, how do I tune this thing? And he told me, and I went home and started playing. 3 years later, Les Thompson called me up and said, hey, you want to join the band at the music store? It's a Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, we're going to call it. And I said, well, that's really cool. Yeah. And I did.
Yeah, you guys all kind of hung out at the same place, right? You would just sort of jam out around a table with your instruments, and then they were like, okay, well, he's good. We're definitely going to ask him to be in it, right? It was like you, Jackson Browne.
Jackson Browne wasn't hanging out there. He came in a couple times. Jackson Browne wasn't really in the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. A couple of the guys like to claim that he was a band member, but Jackson tells me he was, I was just 17 years old. I needed some people to back me up. I had songs I wanted to do, and I learned some of theirs. We did 5 shows.
Okay.
You
So it
know,
was just sort of it was a dalliance.
the
It
guys
was
want to claim Jackson Browne was in the band. That's fine. It's not on his website, in his biography, in his book, or anything. You know, he doesn't have any publicity pictures.
that's
But
funny.
But it's about 2 months into the existence of this group that Les called me. I came in, and a few months later, I convinced my brother to start managing us. And he did. And he got us a record deal. 15 songs we knew, 12 of them ended up on our first album.
There's your brother with Steve Martin and his wife
Alice, yeah.
Alice, who did the lettering, I think, on the Circle record, didn't she?
Yeah, Alice was very involved with the Circle the Unbroken album. The calligraphy that you see with the credits,
Yeah, really cool.
the names, the title, that is not a font that is available. That is her own writing. And the writing on the back of the record, the song titles, you see how that's kind of a burnished piece of paper look?
Yeah, I mean, it literally looks like a historical document, which is really cool.
Well, my brother had her letter on parchment paper, and then he took the paper and he put it in the oven. He set the temperature too high, and the paper went. It took her all day to do that lettering on that one thing. And she was so mad, but she went ahead and did another one. We put it in a lower temperature.
Good for her.
We didn't have Photoshop then.